Welcome to The Explainer. So today, we're going to tackle a massive question, one that has really shaped a nation. What does it actually mean to be poor in modern India? We're going to look at how it's defined, how it's measured, and the huge strategies that have been designed to fight it. All right, let's jump right in.
To really get a handle on this, let's just start with a number that's, well, it's pretty hard to wrap your head around. Back in 2011-12, which was the last major official count, almost 270 million people in India were living below the poverty line. To put that in perspective, that's more people than the entire population of most countries on Earth. But a number that big, it immediately makes you stop and ask, right? What are we even measuring here? What does being poor in India actually mean? And as we're about to see, it's a whole lot more than just not having enough money.
Okay, so the first thing to get is that poverty, it's not just one thing. It's not a single uniform experience. It's actually a really complex condition, and it has different levels of severity, and, it can last for different amounts of time. I mean, think about it, right? Is someone who's just had a really tough month and can't make rent in the same exact situation as someone who has never, ever known a life without serious hardship? Well, economists draw a pretty clear line here, and they categorize the poor based on just how persistent their poverty is. And this slide really shows you the two main buckets. On one side, you have the chronic poor. These are the folks who are pretty much always or usually poor. And on the other side, you've got the transient poor. Think about people like seasonal workers or small farmers, whose incomes can go up and down, pushing them into and out of poverty. But it gets even more complicated than that. These days, we understand that poverty isn't just about what you don't have, it's also about what you're shut out from. There's this idea of social exclusion, which is being kept from the opportunities and the social equality that other people just take for granted. And then there's vulnerability, which means some groups have a much, much higher chance of staying poor, especially when a crisis hits. So if you're going to fight a problem this massive, you've got to be able to measure it. You need to know who you're helping. And that's where this whole idea of a poverty line becomes so important. So what is it? Well, the poverty line is basically a cutoff point. It's a threshold. If your consumption drops below this line, you're officially counted as poor. It's the main tool for tracking the problem on a huge national scale and for figuring out where to send help. Now, what's really fascinating is how India actually calculates this line. It's not based on how much you earn. Nope. It's about how much you consume. Specifically, how much money a person needs each month to get a minimum number of calories every day. And you'll notice it's set a bit higher in rural areas because of more physical work. This focus on consumption is super important because in a country with a huge informal economy, incomes can be really spotty and hard to track. What a family actually uses is a much more stable way of understanding their real standard of living. So, with that yardstick, let's take a look back. If we rewind to the early 1970s, wow, the picture was pretty grim. A staggering 54.9%, yep, more than half of the entire population of India was living below this poverty line. Okay, now let's jump forward about 40 years to 2011-12, and the change is just incredible. The poverty rate had plummeted to 21.9%. Now, the total number of people was still huge, of course, but that drop represents one of the biggest, most significant reductions in poverty the world has ever seen. But here's the thing, that 21.9%, that's just a national average. And averages can be really misleading because the reality on the ground is way more complicated. The story of poverty in India is not the same everywhere you go. It changes dramatically from state to state. Just look at this. You've got a state like Bihar, where the poverty rate was way up at almost 34%, much, much higher than the national average. But then you look at a state like Kerala, and they'd already crushed it down to just over 7%. This really shows you just how uneven the pace of progress has been across the country. So, that makes you wonder, right? How did poverty get so deep and so persistent in the first place? Well, the causes are complicated. They have roots that go way back into history and are tangled up in some long-standing structural problems. It's really a combination of things, kind of like a perfect storm. It starts way back with the legacy of colonial rule, where policies basically dismantled local industries. Then, for decades after independence, economic growth was just slow. Add to that a rapidly growing population that was outstripping resources, widespread illiteracy, and really deep inequalities in who owned land. And you basically create a vicious cycle of poverty.
So, to break out of that vicious cycle, the Indian government knew it couldn't just do one thing. Over the years, it developed this really comprehensive strategy to attack poverty from a bunch of different angles all at once.
And that strategy really boiled down to these three big ideas. One, grow the whole economy because a rising tide can lift all boats. Two, create very specific programs that directly help the poor. And three, make sure everybody has access to the basic necessities, food, education, healthcare, to just improve their quality of life. And this wasn't just theory. This led to some of the biggest, most ambitious social programs on the planet. You have MGN-REGs, which is this massive program that guarantees rural families jobs, the public distribution system, which gets subsidized food to millions, and the midday meal scheme, which makes sure kids get a good meal at school, which helps both their health and their ability to learn.
Okay, so with all that progress, where does India stand now? The gains have been huge, there's no doubt about it. But as the source material makes really clear, this journey is far from over. And this quote really says it all. Decades of hard work have made a huge difference. But getting that remaining part of the population out of poverty and making sure they stay out, well, that's still the toughest challenge India faces.
See, the challenge itself has changed. It's not just about lifting massive numbers anymore. Now, it's more about these stubborn gaps that still exist between rural and urban areas and between the different states. It's about protecting the most vulnerable groups and, maybe most importantly, making sure that every single person has access to good healthcare, education, and a stable job.
So India's fight against poverty, it's been this incredible historic journey that has lifted hundreds of millions of people up. But like we said, that last mile is always the hardest. The big question that's still on the table for policymakers and for the whole country is, what's it going to take to finally finish the job? Thanks for watching The Explainer.